Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time to spend this lunch period with us. I want you all to know that we are live and we're recorded. And at certain portions of this talk with Wiley, we're going to invite you to come into the chat. And then at the end, we'll allow folks to unmute themselves so that you can ask questions. So again, thank you. My name is Cece Poe. I'm head of school here at Baxter Academy, and I'm very happy to host all of you. I'm pleased to be here with Wiley Muller, Baxter's engineering teacher. He has been an essential and vibrant part of Baxter over these past 4 years. He has over 15 years of public school teaching experience, is an outward bound instructor, has been a marine trades professional, and more recently, for the past 3 summers, has co-founded and been the lead instructor for the Lift All Boats program, mentoring, teaching, and coaching young people into the lobstering profession. This Eagle Scout holds a U.S. Coast Guard 100-ton near coastal captain's license and is a dad of 3 young kids. When I see him in the classroom, students are hard at work translating physics, math, and engineering concepts into their own personal interpretation. One thing that struck me was an image that Wiley shared with his class in an activity called See, Think, Wonder. And we're going to test that activity with this crew right now.
Yeah.
All right, Wiley.
Good afternoon, everybody. We appreciate you coming to this little lunch and learn we got going here. We're going to get this kind of started. So we're going to share the screen real quick with you. We're going to get that rocking and rolling. But this activity that we're going to do real quick is something that I can't claim full credit for. I actually stole it from a colleague of mine at Old Orchard Beach High School, who's an art teacher. And she used it when she would analyze artworks and get kids to start to really sort of look beyond just the colors and the shapes of the artwork. And it's called See, Think, Wonder. And I really enjoyed it when I watched her do it. And I thought there's all these different opportunities that you can use it with in different parts of your teaching. And so I've kind of adopted it into my engineering curriculum. And I do this in all my engineering classes every Monday. So it's part of our routine that we do. Every kid sort of always comes in on Monday like, Muller, which is what the kids call me. They call me by my last name. Muller, are we doing a See, Think, Wonder today? And some days we will, and some days we won't. And depending on, how I've unpacked or uncovered different things over the weekend, I find a fresh one. Sometimes I use some old reliables, some old trusties. But what you're looking at here is an old trustee that I actually had a personal interaction with at one point. It's possible that some of you also have had an interaction with this at some point. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of run through this real quick. And the idea is that it's sort of a layered approach. So there's see, there's think, and there's wonder. And the idea is that the kids all have a starting gate that's the same. And when I say to the whole class, what do you see? And it can be something as simple as a color. It can be something as simple as a shape. It can be something as simple as an adjective. So I would invite you all to get into the chat and maybe just give me one thing that you see. And we'll sort of start to unpack that a little bit here, if we can.
It looked like a toilet to me. Degrees, toilet seat for time travel. Angle measurements, I see numbers.
Yeah, so all these responses are great. And so what would happen when this would come through, we'll use Beth as an example. She would say, I see numbers. And then my response would be, okay, great. Paul says a contraption that confuses me. I have no idea what this is. And I would say, okay, great. The idea is that when you respond to every kid with the same sentence, with the same response, your voice has no incantation, it stays the same, that gives the kids a safe place to verbally express what they see. So that way, no kid's answer, no student's answer gets valued more. If CC says, I see a lot of plexiglass, I see red tabs, and I'd be like, oh, CC, that's such a great answer, right? Immediately, what that does is that gives CC power in the space to say, oh, she's the favorite. She's got more of it figured out than I do. And if a kid says, I see blue, okay, great. And so usually what I always say is just, okay, great. So we've got a lot of great responses so far. I see numbers, and I'm going to kind of unpack things a little bit more with you. So, Christian, you say angle measurements. What do you think about those angle measurements? And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. And so I'm going to ask you sort of respond in the chat, if you would, about what you think about those angle measurements. So see and think. And usually I try to elicit a response from everybody in the class. Some kids have their hands up like gophers and prairie dogs. Some kids, are sort of clammed up, but I usually cold call on them and I try to get something for them. They are symmetrical. Okay, great. So, Christian, you're referring to maybe that there's a 30 on this side of the blue plate. There's a 30 here. There's a 90 up here. There's a 90 up here. I appreciate that response. Bethany, what do you think about the angles? And we'll kind of continue to go sort of in this same jam here. So Bethany's going to say 0 to 90. Okay, great. So she's saying 90, and at some point there's a 0 on this blue plate. Okay, great. And so as you can imagine, you're sort of seeing the layered approach. Christian, you would say, what do you wonder about those symmetrical angles? Is this a toilet seat? Okay, great.
Great observation.
Great observation, awesome. And so then the final thing is sort of just like, what do you wonder? And the idea is that it's a layered approach. This is quick. We've done it really fast. There've only been a couple of, maybe 5 responses. But when you're in there and you're in the mix for, 10 seconds or so, I'm sorry, not 10 seconds, 10 minutes or so, a lot of anticipation kind of gets built up. I can sort of already tell that there's a little bit of anticipation on this because you don't really know what it is. And so if we go to the next slide on the slideshow, which CC will go for us, this is actually a device that's used to hold small babies in place when they X-ray them in different parts of the health professional industry. Obviously, like this image is like super wild, right? You got little kids with their arms up, their armpits are exposed. You can't really tell exactly what they are. Everybody here has, for the most part, I think, has a child that's, either with us or maybe coming to us. And so I think this is just such a wild piece of engineering because it really just sort of walks through the whole design process. You can't really hold the baby still, but you got to get those internal images of what the insides look like so that they can make informed decisions and help them and get them moving. And of course, there's all kinds of hoots and hollers from the kids about this one, and they just think it's absolutely hilarious. And so this is a process that I use every day or every week to kind of like just set the groundwork for the kids having a safe learning space in my classroom.
That's awesome, Wiley. Recently, Wiley shared student work at a faculty and staff meeting from his advanced engineering class and impressed us with the variety of student interpretations of his prompts. Could you tell us more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we try to do with the engineering curriculum here at Baxter is we anchor it in the design process. And that always starts with empathizing with different parts of the physics world and the mathematics world. And no matter what age, what skill level, what background information or experience the kids have, that's the most paramount component of really trying to become a good designer and a good engineer.
Yeah.
And we did that this year with we did it with a concept that I hadn't done before, and it's called the 4-bar mechanism. And it's sort of the building blocks for how any kind of like movement or mechanized movement interacts with different components. It's sort of like the skeleton of a mechanism. So that was the concept that we started with.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And are there examples of this?
There are. So we got to pull up a slideshow a little bit more if we can advance the next slide. So this is sort of what it looks like. And it's sort of exactly what it sort of sounds like. There's 4 bars and you have you have these different letters that sort of attach themselves to the bars. And the colors are there for different reasons. The colors aren't necessarily set in stone, but there's 4 bars, and there's movement associated with these bars. And the the math that kind of approaches this that's really interesting. There's super in-depth work that can be done on this. Oftentimes people spend, you know, 3, 4, 5 years in their PhD and grad programs trying to figure out like how the behavior of these 4-bar mechanisms operates. And oops, I'll go back. Sorry, I got a little for myself. But for the most part, we began the operation with Grosshoff's law. So Grosshoff's law is a simple inequality. This is just an algebraic inequality that has different motion attached to different values within the 4-bar mechanism. And so it reads that like L plus S should be less than P plus Q. And if that takes place, then these different motions will take place if the short side of these different arrangements interacts with these different words. So it's a lot to layer that on, but I'll show you sort of what I'm talking about kind of in the next couple slides. So the crank rocker is the first one, and the crank rocker exists right here. So the crank is this turquoise bar that goes in a full 360-degree motion. And the rocker is what takes place when this green bar moves back and forth. And that's what happens. And so if you look, visually speaking, the turquoise link is the shortest link. And the yellow link is what's called the coupler, and the green link is what's called the follower. The purple link is just the base link. And so these all have different like terminologies, but the value of what these are exists in different arrangements. The next one that you have is called the crank crank. And as you're watching, both of these motions are taking place as cranks. And so the purple bar is the base bar. That's the base link. That's not moving anywhere. But the turquoise link and the green link are both doing a full 360. The yellow link is the following link, and that also sort of like just behaves in conjunction with this turquoise link being the drive link. The last one is what's called the rocker rocker. So right now, our arrangement's a little bit different colorly speaking, but the yellow link is rocking. The turquoise link is doing sort of a compound 360-degree motion, but that's the follower. And then, I'm sorry, that's the coupler. And then the green link is the follower. So it's basically crank rocker, crank crank, and rocker rocker are the two different the 3 different motions. There's a fourth, and that gets a little bit more complex, but those are the three different like base motions that we studied and we got into at the beginning of this process.
So you started the kids understanding those 3 things.
Correct.
And then they had to interpret it.
They had to interpret it. They had to get comfortable with the vocabulary. They had to sort of like do a lot more work about like how they were thinking about how all this worked. I'm sort of like pushing this pretty quickly at you. This was, this little tiny tidbit of information. We probably unpacked this over like 2 to 3 55-minute class periods.
Yep.
With a lot of work at the board, a lot of examples. Yeah.
So let's see some kid work.
Exactly. So how do we get back to the slideshow here? So
do you want to go back to like
if you go to the next one. Yeah, so this was what we called the 4-bar linkage formative. So this was the beginning of one of our formative assessments on this. And so this was an example that I had just written up on the board. And so my example was that the short link right here that's in the blue, that would be the drive link. That would be S. L would be the long link, which would be the coupler. The follower would be a red link, P, and then Q would be the base link. So this was sort of the way that I laid it out for the students, is that they needed to have 3 diagrams where they discovered how to make a crank rocker 4-bar, a crank crank, and a rocker rocker. They needed to have a drive, follower, and a coupler, and these were the 2 different movements. This was the Groshoff condition, and they needed to show me that like in a diagram, and they needed to show values that either proved or disproved that the Groshoff condition was in effect. And so that's a pretty difficult thing to do, conceptually speaking, when you're sitting there with like rulers and pens and not a lot of materials to kind of prototype with. And so one of the things that I was able to do this year was we've got these these Lego robotics kits that someone wrote a grant for 3 years ago or so, and they're full of all kinds of great parts. Some of you, I'm sure, are Lego families. Some of you have dealt with all this kind of stuff before, but these are really excellent Lego kits. They've got motors and different things like that. They've got all kinds of gears and wheels. And these are seniors in high school that I'm dealing with. And so you would think, at the surface that a senior in high school may not be into dealing with Legos. But what's phenomenal about these is that they allow the students to rapidly prototype. And so at the core of this, this was a prototype from a student that they made to kind of talk about the different motion that can take place with this. And so this is a crank in my left hand spinning, and the motion over here by my index finger, that's a rocker rocker. If you change this rocker doesn't even really move as the drive link, barely, and it won't work. And so this was a way that the students could actually prototype with real parts quickly. They could use the Lego holes to create the values that were the distances of the links from center point to center point, and they could prove or disprove that Groshoff was, in effect for their 4-bar linkages.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Next slide.
Sure. So this is some kid example work here. This was a student of ours that sort of like, started the process, right? So it's tough to kind of read, but this was a rocker rocker. The long length was 15, 7, 7, 11. So here was some of the math right here, not Groshoff, crank, crank. There's some more stuff kind of happening here. There's a few more holes, some values down here, crank rocker. These were sort of some different examples that I got right out of the gate here with this. Another one here, this is a little bit of a different style. Again, the students had color, they had good vocabulary ID, they had values down in here. This student chose to use calipers instead of holes, so they went with full, millimeter measurements and did whole metric measurements. So this Groshoff works on this one. This was a crank rockers coming over here. Groshoff works, but there is no 360-degree rotation in the drive of the follower. So these, this was all for 4-level work that we're showing you for some of these examples. Again, down here, proving that the inequality is indeed under the Groshoff condition.
So in these cases, the student's ability to communicate their interpretation is super important.
Exactly. And they did this in a way that wasn't just one color. They had multiple colors going. There's opportunity for visual learners to look at this and understand a little bit clearer of what's happening. I left sort of the sticky note on this to sort of show you all an example of how feedback is given in my class. This would be a piece of paper that would be given to me. A couple of days later, this is given back to a student. I try not to mark on the paper in case, it's really high quality work. The student can use this and take the sticky note off and use that for their portfolio. But again, this is some super high quality work here that Anna Marston turned in. And then this is another student of ours that had a little bit more of a basic layout, when you compare it to Anna's, but at the same time also communicated that here's the drive, the crank, the coupler, the follower, values are put in here. It takes a little bit to sort of sift through it all, but Groshoff is in play, no Groshoff. So again, you get a myriad of different layouts, but at the same time, it's sort of one of the reasons why I love teaching is that you get all these different little tunnels into the mind of how these students work and how they're going to choose to answer the question.
Awesome. All right, next one.
So that's the end of the formative.
Okay. So I'm going to get out of the slideshow.
Yeah, absolutely. Get out of the slideshow. So that was the formative. That was sort of the warm up for what we were shooting for. And all the students that I have in this advanced engineering class, I've had all of them for at least 2 classes prior to their advanced engineering class, and one of which is CAD. Or if I haven't taught them CAD, one of our other 2 CAD teachers has, and we all communicate super closer together. So I've got a really good pulse of what their CAD skills are. And the four-bar mechanism, since it's the building blocks of any kind of like motion, I decided that we were going to explore some mechanisms that took circular motion to linear motion. And so the students in my advanced engineering class had to have, they had to we laid out a long list of these different types of mechanisms. And then they were given a 7 inch by 7 inch by 7 inch cube of space, and their mechanism had to exist inside of that cube. They had to have metal, they had to have 3D printed parts, and they had to enclose the mechanism inside of clear material. And they also had to come up with all the geometry, they had to print the parts, they had to make the parts work, and they had to fasten the parts together. And so I've got some different examples of what some of these students that you just saw their work. These are some examples of what some of these students made. So this was an example of something called a lead screw. So again, I want to be really clear about this. This was a pile of parts. This was a sheet of acrylic. This was an idea from students' heads. And they came up and designed all this completely from scratch in our software. So the crank is on the side here. So this is the rotational movement. And if you look at the red, this lead screw, it moves back and forth. So if you spin the crank, the lead screw eventually works its way over towards CC. And then if you spin it the other way, it works its way back over this way. So that's a lead screw, which is a type of circular to linear motion mechanism. That's one. This one over here, a similar deal. Again, you got the closed acrylic case. This is called a barrel cam. So the cylinder here is the actual the cam, but inside of it, there are these sort of like these channels kind of cut into it. So if you spin this crank on the top, you can see that little nub on the side that moves up and down consistently like an elevator. So this is called a barrel cam. So that was another style that we had done. And then another example is we had something called a scotch and yoke. And this is one that has a couple of different parts. You can see this is the red crank here, and you've got this sort of green disc. And if you look on the other side of the mechanism, there's this yoke that moves back and forth here. So if you watch the black bar, when you spin the disc, it causes that yoke to move back and forth, and you get linear motion in through, going side to side that way. So we had 12 of these that got done. Students were in pairs for this assignment.
They're also different, Wiley. Like what do the kids bring into the classroom that's like their own self and interest that leads to such a diverse array of outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, basically they bring in like these different abilities to manipulate materials, essentially. And within our design department and within the engineering department, that's a huge part of what builds the students' confidence, is the ability to manipulate materials and then use math to prove that the material manipulation is going to solve the physics problem that is put in front of them. So just like any other skill, any other hard skill that you have, that's going to lend itself to different strengths and different weaknesses. So that's one of the things that helps give those designs and those products sort of an identity.
I know the different kids also come with things outside of engineering that they really care about. Like one of them's really into how urban environments works. Another student is really into drones. Like they bring all this external interests in. How do you balance like the course curricular goals that you need or want for the students to attain with their different interests?
Yeah, I mean, really, when you've had them for 3 years, you build these relationships with the kids where you kind of already know all that coming in. And when you can find like a little soundbite of information, a little opportunity to connect all this into what they're really into, then all of a sudden they sort of see the importance of like learning this a little bit more,
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's the answer to the question after that.
What are you passionate about as a teacher of teenagers?
I think the thing that I really love to see as an educator is to see a kid or a student that isn't confident, and then they get an opportunity to showcase a skill set that may not always be seen as the coolest, or it may not always be seen as the flashiest. But then all of a sudden, when you put some sizzle next to the steak and you really have this product come at the end that's just like really impressive, and that kid, their whole demeanor completely changes
Yeah.
when they come into the building at school. And then all of a sudden they've got this newfound confidence about them.
Mhm.
And you see that kid transform into a confident young individual that's going to go do amazing things and solve problems just by learning how to put something together with their bare hands. That's really kind of what I get passionate about.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so awesome.
Yep.
I want to share also, Wiley, that you give a lot to the school outside of your classroom. And there's a story of iteration that I wanted to share with everybody.
Sure. Yeah.
Let me see. So last spring, we had about 40 kids supported by Olivia Grisette from the Maine Environmental Educators Association, professors from the Rue Institute, scientists from local LGC. These 40 kids hosted a Women in STEM forum at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute in April of 2025. And we were really struggling to get a student logo into a printing process. They looked really bad. So Wiley was nearby and he made so many. I feel like you didn't just use the 3D printers. Didn't you try the laser at one point?
We had a bunch of
So,
things going.
so
Yeah.
this was the first prototype. You can't see it very, I don't know. Can you see it? Um, and then this is the second prototype and the third prototype, and then there's another one we're missing, which is the final prototype.
Right. Yeah. We couldn't find that.
That was made out of softer material. So like you see these beautiful pieces of work that the students have done. But I just wanted to tell the story of Wiley himself embodying the process of iteration in trying to solve a problem. And it took many times before he could help lift this student's design into a logo. So really grateful for everyone here for joining us. I want you all in the audience to feel that we believe that drawing out our students' passions and lived experiences helps them dare more, and to put their hearts and minds to the challenges of our world that need innovative solutions. And Wiley Muller here, as an exemplary teacher of modeling, coaching, teaching, and mentoring for this process. Thank you, Wiley.
Thank you, Cece.
We want to open it up for questions. I know we've been operating off of the chat in part because of technological things, but now we want to give folks a chance to unmute. Can you do that for us, Amos? And then I'm going to get us to viewing and to see if anybody has any questions or anything to share. We'd love to hear from you.
This is Natasha. Can I?
Hi, Natasha.
Hi. I do not have a kid in your school yet. I'm just kind of investigating.
Okay.
Um, but I'm an engineer myself, and I can tell you that your class would be probably the least boring I've ever taken. Like,
Oh,
it's so engaging, right? I took so many engineering classes and they were so boring and so hard. So I see that kids who are into engineering probably enjoy your class a lot. So thank you for sharing that. This is my first kind of dip into your school.
well,
My kid,
welcome, Natasha.
unfortunately, is not passionate about engineering. He's all about drawing, uh,
Yes.
but it was a wonderful
Yeah.
presentation. Thank you.
That's great, Natasha. Thank you. And you know what? Tune in to the next time when we're going to feature an art teacher.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Lisa. Hi, I just
Hi,
want to say
Lisa.
thank you. Hi, thank you so much for this. It's very, very interesting. It's over my head, but definitely something that I think my son would be interested in. He's in eighth grade, so we're looking at it for next year. So thank you for having this session. It's very informative.
Awesome, Lisa.
Yeah, well-
Thanks for joining us. Others? I see there's a chat here. Looks cool. Thank you.
Christian, did you have your hand up? I thought I saw it. No, okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here with us. We hope to have more of these, another one coming in January, and hope you'll join us to get an inside look at teaching and learning here at Baxter Academy.